Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to this episode of The Wisdom of, where we explore deeper wisdom and get above the tips, tricks, hacks level of conversation and explore how business can be a powerful force for good on the planet in a world that's increasingly complex, politically, socially, economically. And today I'm joined by an extraordinary guest whose work sits at that intersection of innovation, sustainability, and I'm going to say bold leadership. Lauren Flanagan is the CEO and co-founder of Sesame Solar, a company redefining how we respond to climate disasters. And under her leadership, Sesame Solar has developed the world's first renewable mobile nanogrids, off-grid power solutions that can be deployed in 15 minutes or less by one person using the sun and green hydrogen. So we definitely need to understand more about that. It's a fascinating concept. Lauren spent decades championing technology that creates a better future, especially for underserved communities and emergency responders. And so she's not just building energy solutions, she's building resilience. And I think there's probably some compassion at the core of that. And so she was co-founder and CEO of one of the first SaaS companies, Lauren. That's a great thing to be able to claim, Webware Corporation, until it was acquired by a publicly traded company. I think at that point you also worked pretty closely with Steve Jobs, if I'm right. So seasoned investor. I mean, it rattles off 32 companies invested in the last 8 years or so, featured in Authority magazine. So much to talk about, so much more I can say about you, but I'm sure people want us just to get into the conversation, basically, and find out more about you and what you're doing. So welcome to the Wisdom of, and thank you so much for giving us this time.
Well, thank you, Simon, and I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
What I think I want to launch into straight away actually is Sesame Solar. Let's go to what you're doing right now, and we can backtrack, through the lessons and the wisdom of the career that you've had. But Sesame Solar is such an interesting idea. This self-sustaining ability to create a power unit, if you like, that needs basically sunshine and air and a bit of moisture to be able to act as a power unit in emergency. Step us through that, because it sounds so innovative but so obvious once someone's actually conceived of the idea.
Yeah, so the first problem I wanted to solve, because I love to start with concrete, simple problems that if you fix them can solve big problems, because that's just a great way to start any business, because you have a defined problem. And so I was thinking about, during these extreme weather events, whether they're hurricanes or tornadoes or fires or drought or just all the extreme things that are happening with greater frequency and severity in our world, that we're doing exactly the wrong thing. So typically the power goes out, often communications go out, and people are desperate for help. And what do? We send diesel generators and trailers out to solve the problem, which is fine. I mean, we do that because they're easy to use, they're fast to deploy, they're ubiquitous, they don't take a lot of training, everybody understands how to do that. But as we do that, we're compounding the problem. We're adding particulate to the air and water. We're adding more CO2 emissions, which contribute to, having more extreme weather in the first place. And so I thought, if we could just stop that and have a different solution, what would that be? So first of all, it'd have to map to the fast to deploy and easy to use solution that diesel generators or fossil fuel generators have. And then second, to change behavior, it would have to be a better solution. So in integrating it into a single, easy to use, one person can set everything up that you need, as opposed to setting up the generator plus a trailer that might have different services. That was sort of my beginning, like light bulb, how could we do it? And so that's what we're doing today. We're first to market with self-generating power that comes from solar, from hydrogen as our backup source, that powers a battery that then delivers the power needed for whatever the solution inside is. And that might be an emergency office, it might be communications, might be clean water generation, it might be a medical unit. There's really no limit to what you can do, just like you could have any kind of trailer that you bring to bear, plus a power source after an emergency. But we try to put it all into one, a complete solution that you don't have to do anything else and you're ready to go. So I think it's really about solving a problem with a very complete solution that makes adoption easy because it's a better solution and it's self-generating power. So there's no fuel supply chain required. So after you buy the initial one, actually the operating costs are a lot less. So it's really compounding the financial benefits, the ease of use benefits, the fast to deploy benefits without creating all these ancillary issues from fossil fuels.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, you said something in the middle of that from a technical point of view is that. So, in full disclosure, my early career was in electrics and electronics, and so you know, there's a. I want to frame this in a minute. In fact, we'll build a little model about this in a minute, so that people watching the episode can walk away with a framework that they could apply. Because what you've really just done is given people sort of a secret to business success, and it's understanding the end output. As long as you have the load required contained inside the trailer, and then you can meet that with supply, this thing kind of becomes self-sustaining.
It'll run forever.
Yeah.
We have a unit we've done with the Army in the US on a particular missile base, and it's almost 8 months now, 24/7, unmanned, running a pretty consistent load, zero power outages. I'm knocking on wood, you can't see it. But, this is like the ultimate, it's just a self-sustaining energy loop that if you properly system size the power generation to the power draw, it can run forever.
Yeah. So the key is to build a contained system, and control as many of the variables as you can. And then that allows you to put almost a failure proof solution in place for people. But you made some interesting comments. And one of those was, the best way to start a business is to find almost an obvious, quite tangible problem that needs to be solved. And the solution might be complex. Figure out the solution, and then figure out how to take that to market. And what's interesting about that is, power generation is a fairly old and staid industry. Diesel-driven generators and things like that. So, I mean, I wanted to step through this idea of in a space where it's quite traditional, maybe resistant to change. How do you bring something new to market? You're first to market on this, and often first to market has to knock down all the barriers and get people to even think that they want to use this thing. And so I'm wondering if I want to capture some of the things that you just spoke about. If we think about two dimensions, one of them is adoption. And I'm going to ask you to help me identify the ends of these scales in a minute. But the other one is that adoption and then actually solution. So we've seen many people bring a great solution to market, but it had no adoption. And so, but then of course we see people bring a solution to market that actually isn't that great. It's just like everything else. But from an adoption point of view, when you bring something like Sesame Solar to market, what would the two ends of that scale be for you when you're first into market? You're trying to launch something, obviously way over on the right-hand side, this would be full adoption. How do you think about that? When you go to market and you've got this vision of everybody's using Sesame Solar, what does that look like for you, that adoption is just almost automatic and high?
Well, for example, you're in Australia, but every island nation in the world faces, increasing threats of extreme weather because of warming waters and air, however you attribute it, whether climate change or evolution, but these extreme weather events are happening. And tides are rising, and there's all kinds of extreme weather. So that's huge. And then there's a lot of remote areas, plus there's power failures and grid fragility in a lot of areas. So actually, we think everywhere in the world needs this, but there are particular sectors that need it more. And these are remote locations where there's no grid or fragile grid, island nations which face extreme weather. And then there's certain, defense and commercial applications that need it. So we started with this premise that we're kind of doing the wrong thing in an emergency, but we knew that there's huge adjacent markets, whether the defense or commercial, and they're very large geographies. So actually, this is a mega billion-dollar,
Yeah.
market. But you start early because you have to get those early adopters who are willing to try things and experiment and help you get the data. And fortunately, that's both commercial and defense markets for us that do that. And then you try to really load that solution, but also make it modular and scalable so that it really can take off.
Yeah, fantastic. So, um, your thought when I said when you think about adoption, your thought went immediately to global, right?
Absolutely.
Which is, and
100% global, everywhere in the world.
okay, and I sometimes wonder when entrepreneurs are starting something, if their thinking is as bold as that straight away in terms of let's build this thing so it goes global. What have you seen in other entrepreneurs from an adoption point of view around their solution that aren't as bold? How do a lot of people frame it? Do they just stay in their geographical space, or do they, niche marketing, for example? You went global and every niche, every industry, right? Is niche marketing safe? Is it playing it safe?
Well, we started actually with a very simple, I mean, our first deployments were in the Caribbean on the
Yep.
island of Dominica, which was devastated after Hurricane Maria. And I'm like, if we can't solve this problem, we don't have a business. So I like to have a kind of Occam's razor like that, or a real challenge, existential challenge. If you can't do this, then you don't deserve to be a business and you should shut down, because fast fail is good, actually, before you spend years doing something that's never going to succeed. And
Yes.
actually, our first deployments in Dominica are still working and running. But that was a great opportunity for us where we also really understood better the problem of island nations and the fragility of their grid, the kind of climate challenges that they face with extreme weather events, rising tides, storms. That's creates a really difficult challenge, but there's so many of those islands. And so immediately we knew, we were picking a very discrete little island in the Caribbean, but we knew this could be global if we were successful.
Fantastic. So, adoption moves from like a test case to global, and I guess solution then moves from untested to you're first to market on
Repeatable,
this. Pardon?
first to market and repeatable. The whole goal is to get a repeatable uh, solution, and then one that you can manufacture at scale.
Okay, repeatable, scalable.
Yeah,
And I know over here, you want it to be better than everything else in the market, but that might be
absolutely.
inside the grid. In order to get something up to that level where it's repeatable, scalable, and it's global, if we were giving people, a young entrepreneur, we've got a young entrepreneur ahead and we're saying, hey, there's 3 things you need to achieve to get to that, that top right quadrant for it to be repeatable, scalable, and global. What 3 big tips? I know that one of the things you said was it's got to be better than anything else.
Yeah, and we actually use first principles. So, and it's great if you have a reference or predicate, So in our case, you want to replace fossil fuel generators with something that's better. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it has to be, as I said, with generators, fast to deploy and easy to use. But if it's going to be better, it needs to be simple, because in fact, those things aren't. A lot of times they break down and there's issues. And it needs to be efficient. In our case, it had to be mobile, so we could take it where it needed to be modular. It had to be durable. These are all the things that contribute to, you take all those little concepts, but that's how you have your essential design principles.
Yeah.
So if you lay those down on a matrix, then that helps you form like what are the technologies that you need to use. So I think you've got to get those first principles of If you really want to achieve simplicity, efficiency, and be able to replace incumbent technologies, it has to be better. And
Yeah.
so those are like, because people won't change their behavior. If it's just a little bit better, okay, fine, but they're not going to change behavior. It has to be radically better. But at the same time, has to have the ease of use, deployability, and if it can be simple, it's great. It's really the biggest challenge, I think, in technology, and I love this challenge, is how to make very complex things easy to use.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people launching into and you used the term before, launching into a new product, place a lot of emphasis on the early adopters. We've got these people using it, but that doesn't actually prove, a repeatable, scalable, successful business model yet, because the early adopters are really comfortable with untested solutions. Let's give it a go. As opposed to, I suppose, up here in this quadrant, people can see a relatable, scalable business, but it's still in this test case mold. People are seeking proof, which is why the
Right.
test case is so critical. I don't know what is down in that bottom left quadrant. I don't know what the label of that bottom left quadrant is when a business is stuck down there. They've got an untested solution. They've got one test case, if you like, but it hasn't proven it yet as repeatable and scalable and doable. I'm not sure what that. I don't know if anything's, in your mind, an entrepreneur finds themselves down in that quadrant. What does that circumstance look like?
Well, I actually might say move early adopter there, and in the right one, I might say urgent need. Because if you had an urgent need, then you are kind of willing to cross the chasm, right? So if you have an urgent need or problem,
Yeah.
you are going to be even more willing to adopt than an early adopter. Early
Yes.
adopters are ones that will try new technologies because they like innovation. They want to be first. I just had a meeting today with an organization. So, we want to do this because we want to be first in our category. So there's a lot of people who like that. That's kind of fills a desire they have for innovation or a desire for recognition. But if you solve an urgent need, then with a solution that really meets that urgent need, you became a must-have, and that then will propel you to global opportunities.
So if there's two business paths to the top right quadrant, and they go through, you 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 do this in a test case in an untested product with the early adopters, then you've got to prove it, which means get some people to buy it and commercialize it, versus pathway two, where you test it, you can hit an urgent need on this. Scalability and repeatability obviously is going to be a function of you being able to unfold the internal mechanisms of your business. What part is either one of those paths more fast track than the other one for someone who's a founder, startup, bringing new technology to market? Would you generally go down the urgent need path first before you start trying to prove it to the whole world?
Yeah, I mean, for example, defense is urgent need. So, you find these opportunities that have to have this, then that's really good because that can help drive your volume. But then the early adopters will work with you because they love innovation and they'll help you make your product better. So they're both important. They're both the low-hanging fruit of opportunity as opposed to, trying to create a market somewhere. If
Yeah.
you can find those innovators that want to be first, want to try it, want to help you make a better product, that's a good long-term partner that will help you grow. But at the same time, if you can meet those urgent needs, you can have immediate growth that can help you towards scalability.
And that might be where the niche conversations start to emerge. The urgent needs are going to be in specific niches that then allow you to scale repeatedly across other sectors that maybe don't have the same urgency. It's interesting, if we think about starting a business, solve a problem that is obvious and tangible first, find a place to test it, a test case where it's controllable and it maybe doesn't expose your solution to the entire world visibly and publicly just yet, allows you to control the test case, test it. In your own mind, you need to be able to prove to yourself that it's repeatable and scalable. at the level of quality that you need to produce it at, because some people are going to require proof. That's one pathway. Go and capital raise and scale up, and you're almost testing in the open market, as opposed to, okay, step out of the test case in terms of adoption and go to niches or parts of market that have an urgent need. You know this will solve. It's still not high volume and full scale yet, but you can prove it in niches. And then based on first principles and bringing something to market that is simpler, faster, more efficient, and better than anything else comparatively in the marketplace, the business will start to scale because you've now turned this tangible problem no one was solving into this repeatable, scalable, better quality than anything else on the planet. You got to think global, folks. Be bold and go for the bigger game, but start in a controllable, testable environment. All pulled out of Lauren's wisdom in terms of how she brought multiple solutions to market and indeed invested in a whole bunch of companies. Was there a catalytic moment for Sesame that? I mean, obviously the environment's important to you, and climate, better climate management, but also these fast responses and ability to be able to respond, when there's an emergency, but also long term. I think you said 18 months. One of the units is deployed with the Air Force. But was there a catalytic moment that sparked the thought of Sesame Solar? Was there, or did it just emerge over time?
Well, there are kind of two things. I think the desire to address extreme weather events and climate change was emerging over time as I saw them, beginning with Katrina, which was really catastrophic for the US, the hurricane. And that I always thought the government would be ready, but they weren't. And I realized we all have to contribute to that, businesses and individuals, to try to solve it. So that was part of it, wanting to do something to solve this problem and kind of thinking of a very discrete problem we could solve to do the test case. But I think really the part where I got to the next level of how do you make this continuous self-generating energy loop, we actually had bid on a contract in the state of California for a mobile, generator type of solution that was using renewable power. And we did a lot of work on it. It was one of these things is about this thick in your bid, and we lost. And one of the reasons we lost was we had used fossil fuel generators as a backup power. And they're like, oh, we don't want any fossil fuel. But that, I guess, wasn't crystal clear in the instructions. And I'm like, okay, so what else could we do? And I started thinking, well, we had not used hydrogen before because as a primary energy source, it's not as energy efficient as you might want. But then if you think of it as a backup, where you're doing it asynchronously, it's actually brilliant because you can make stored hydrogen when it's not needed, and then you can pull on it from your fuel cell when it is needed if you're not making enough solar energy, and you can have that backup power and never need to use a fuel supply source. And when I kind of got this aha moment, I'm like, okay, this is really the self-generating loop that we need, and we need to go into this direction. And it was kind of novel to think of hydrogen as backup power, because for many people, they tout it as primary power, and it has pros and cons. But as asynchronous backup power, make the hydrogen when you don't need it, store it at low pressure as a solid, so it's not polyporific, it's not going to explode, and be able to transport it at low pressure, so you can put on a plane, a train, a ship, a car, a vehicle. Then that's really advantageous. And that was like the aha for me. And that got us into this whole self-generating energy loop, and then realizing, wow, there's so many markets that we can address with this notion.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. You're a self-proclaimed nerd from a young age.
Total geek. Geek my whole life.
Geek, playing with this sort of stuff, right? So, you're playing into something we often talk about. Founder-based companies generally go to the market on the back of some kind of unique genius that others haven't brought to the market. And, the founder's somehow seen around corners that others didn't see. This realization you had about hydrogen as backup rather than primary power source. And the challenge for companies is to codify that genius in some way so that the genius of the founder doesn't exit. And when you're no longer there, sometime down the track, Sesame Solar kind of goes, well, do we really need the hydrogen as a backup power? Why don't we make the hydrogen the primary power source? Then you have high pressure hydrogen problems, transportation, and everything else. There's always this genius. And I know that, when you were with Webware, you had the opportunity to, you had a fair bit of interaction with Steve Jobs. I heard you making a comment that he, whilst also very supportive of you, had this view that he wants to make a product that no one knows they want until they have it, and then they can't do without it. And so the key is design, right? I think it'd be interesting for you, if you could just tap into, because it strikes me you kind of think the same way. What is the problem that people don't even realize they're having? But if we solve that, adoption will almost become automatic. What are some of the lessons you learned, not just from Steve, but even in the history of your journey, about spotting those things? Everyone would love to find the idea, but seeing those things, or is it just a uniqueness that some people have, do you think?
Well, I think that's something I really learned from Steve Jobs. Was all about design is essential, good design. If you think about just all the years, particularly when he was at the helm, and you would open any package from Apple, already opening it was delightful.
Yeah.
I mean, the packaging was beautiful. You're like, oh, you're just like carefully opening it versus ripping through your usual computer stuff because you wanted to see all the parts and it was so nicely done. And then the products were great. They were really well designed. And you realize that design is some of those things, one of those things that really sets you apart. And so for me, it wasn't so much pure design as maybe he might have thought of it, but I thought of it as pure design in terms of really solving a problem completely. Walk yourself through every single step in the process that you might have to do. If you're an emergency responder, you have no power, no communications, no water, you got people evacuated from their homes. What are the things that you most need to do? It's kind of like Maslow, principles of survival. You need the power, water, communications, and food. You need to help people. So what are those principles that you can do? So I learned a lot from him about that, but also making things look nice and be functional, and the form and fit are good, and there's some delight to the package. I think that's really important. And, as opposed to making a Me Too product, if you can be distinctive in look and design and feel, if it can be very complete in its solution, so you really have to do very little, you just open it up and it works. I mean, you think about, you open up a MacBook Air, which I'm talking to you on now. I've had this particular one for a few years. It worked the first minute I've opened it, and I've never had a problem from I opened it. And so that's like really a standard of how you want a product to work. And I learned a lot from that as to, how you think about what good means and what delighting a customer means, and how you can stand apart by a good design, which might not just be looks and cosmetics. It's, to me, form and function and usefulness.
Yes. Yes. If you look at the Sesame Solar units, they're a power unit with a nanogrid inside to supply power to what is happening inside, right, in terms of some form of office or process or whatever. But actually, they're beautiful. They don't look industrial. They do have form and function, so you can see the design element in it. And the Apple boxes may be the most kept packaging box on the planet, I suspect.
I still have my iPhone, which I'm about to get rid of from, I don't know, four years ago.
I've got
crazy.
So many Apple boxes that I'm sure I'll use one day, but I just can't bring myself to throw out the box, right? So, you carry that idea of design through. A lot of people throw out the term first principles in conversation. We've had other people talk about it, but just your thoroughness around the complete problem and solve the complete problem. I love the idea. Get a pragmatic problem and solve it. I'd love to lean in on first principles a little bit more for people that might not fully understand what we mean when we say that. So I'd love you to unpack, we lent in a little bit when we built the matrix, but what does first principles mean from a design point of view? Solving what's the thought process when you go back to, okay, here's a problem I want to solve it. First principle thought process. Where do you start? What does that start to look like?
Well, what is the most essential aspect of the problem and the current solution that's the incumbent, in our case, fossil fuel generators? Why is it that people use them? Well, they're ubiquitous, they're fast to deploy, and they're easy to use. They have a lot of cons, they break down maintenance, they got pollution, and they contribute, CO2 emissions. There's a lot of that, but you just get to why they use them. You have to really understand that, because that's what you've got to do better. And
Mm,
so you've got to really understand. So the first principle is really defining the problem. What exactly is the problem? What are all the parameters? And the current solutions that are the incumbent, why is it that they're incumbent? So that's where you really start. And
mm,
then how much can you break that down further to do it better, right? And that's what I mean by first principles. Well,
interesting.
we think fast to deploy, easy to use. Well, what does that really mean? All right, let's put ourselves, in a Home Depot parking lot, and a hurricane has just hit, and there's 100 people who are coming in who don't have a home anymore. They've been dropped off by a bus, and their cell phones don't work, or they lost them. What are we going to do? How do we address these people? You have to put yourself in that moment and feel it, smell it. It's like almost odorama. You have to feel the whole thing as if you're there, and better, of course, if you have that life experience. But like, what do you need to do to immediately solve that problem? And the more you can either be there, study it, go on the ground, or imagine it, that is basically part of the problem solving.
Yeah, I love the distinction about why are people using the current solution, even if it's not as good as yours.
Yeah,
I
it's
speak,
the incumbent. It's
yeah,
winning today.
yeah, and I speak to a lot of business leaders who will say our product's so much better than everything else in the marketplace. But first principles will say, well, why is everyone using everything else in the marketplace? It's that old, I don't even know if it's true, but that, the old mousetrap story where someone invented the world's best mousetrap that actually caught the mice and you could take them outside and release them, as opposed to the trap that obviously doesn't serve the mouse very well, but they could never sell them. But it might be a better mousetrap, but the question is, why do people use the old mousetrap, right? They don't like the mice, quite frankly.
They want to kill them.
They don't want
And
the mouse.
they don't like change. People do what they know how to do,
Yeah,
and they don't want to learn new behaviors until they're either compelled to, or it's such a better solution.
yeah, absolutely. You've invested in 32 companies, I think, over kind of the last, let's say, 8 to 10 years. What do you look for um, in a company, in a founder? What triggers your interest first, and then your willingness to now invest. What hooks you in? That's interesting. I want to look at that, and then I'm gonna invest in that.
Well, I love really big problems, really complicated, hard to solve problems. That's just more interesting, right? To
Mm,
help make the world better. So I'm always about not just solving a problem that isn't important, but an important problem that helps make the world better. I mean, our mantra at Sesame Solar is people, planet, profits. And we're very keen on that. People are our most valuable asset, our team, our customers, our partners, our investors, our suppliers, our community. They're our most valuable asset. Planet, we're trying to help preserve and protect the planet for future generations, and profitable operations allow us to continue to innovate. So that's like, I love having a mantra like that and having that mission. So I look for big problems that make the world better. And then the entrepreneur, like, it's all about them, the entrepreneur and the team. Are they able to do it? What's special about them? Why them? Why now? And so the big problem, because you can make a lot of mistakes, but if you're solving a big problem and you get at least part of it right, you're going to live for another day to continue to iterate and innovate, because we almost never get it right the first time. It takes a few years to do it. And then a team that has that kind of persistence and vision and the ability. And I always think, why them? Why now?
okay.
And so what? Why them? Why now?
Interesting. So really, the interest is sparked by the what and the why. Is this a big problem? And is it going to serve a purpose? Um, and then, but you invest based on the who and the
Right,
timing of that. So you get interested, what and why, and you invest on the who and when.
right.
Interesting, fascinating. So you've been at the front end of markets with the companies that you've founded and run. First to market with Sesame Solar. What you know, there's a different nervous system required to be at the front end of the market.
Or maybe no nervous system.
So I'd love to unpack the pros and cons of being first to market. I think everyone has this dream they want to be first to market with something, but it's not for everybody, and sometimes it can backfire. Based on your experiences, what are the pros and cons of being first to market? Because it's something everyone thinks they're striving for, but it isn't always what everyone thinks it is. I'd love to unpack that first to market world.
Well, if you're first to market, you can get, certainly a certain amount of market recognition, which can attract those early adopters to come to you. And so that's one of the reasons you want to be first to market. Of course, the risk is somebody else watches you and then finds your mistakes and what you
Mm,
did right and what you did wrong. They copy, they have more capital, and they do it better and they kill you, right? So, it's not always great to be first to market. You don't want to be too bleeding edge. But if you are first to market, you can't just think of that as the end goal. That's the beginning. You have to continuously innovate and continuously, work to find product market fit so that it's really about being a continuous innovation engine, and that will drive those first adopters, and that will help you find the solutions to those urgent needs.
mm. And how do I think one of the things that's happening, one of the byproducts of artificial intelligence, for example, is IP, might be losing value quite rapidly depending on what it is you bring to market. And, if I can't remember what company it was, but one of their programmers dropped, in the early stages of ChatGPT, dropped some key code from one of their programs in there to find improvements. Of course, what they'd just done was dropped core IP into the large language model. And so, IP protection, I think, is going to become a bigger and bigger issue for people. It's getting easier to look at what somebody else conceptualized and then create a copy of that these days. Are there any mechanisms or any thought processes when you come up with a new solution, a complete solution, you want to be first to market, but how do you hold on to that original genius edge for as long as possible?
Well, I think, intellectual property can have many aspects. I mean, we always think of patents, and patents are great, but, they're really more valuable to large companies because they're only as valuable as you have a budget to litigate to protect them,
Correct.
right? If you're a little company and you can't afford the lawsuit, it doesn't do you a lot of good. But big companies like to know you have the IP patents because they do have the budgets. And then there's, other kinds of IP like software. But probably in our kind of business with manufacturing, really the trade secrets and manufacturing art, because you don't even show that in any of the patents, because that's the secret sauce. So the
Right.
patent might describe the broad aspects of it, but the little details that how you actually do it, that should be secret into manufacturing art. And then having, multiple levels that you are able to deliver value. So we manufacture, we integrate, and then we also have software. And so all of those things are part of the solution. That's hard to replicate overnight. And if you keep innovating and growing those kind of, three-ring circus, if you will, of value, that helps give you protection. But, to your point, AI, you can look at a patent and somebody who's smart at it could say, oh, well, they missed these things. I could go get a different patent and, semi-copy it and come up with another angle. But it doesn't really do you any good if you can't build it and make it really work. And so you don't really show those secrets. Just like I've never copyrighted software because why? You're just showing people your solution. You just keep that as a trade secret.
Yeah. Interesting. And then, of course, the market itself. is probably the greatest protection that you can have. If the market knows that you were first to market and are probably still the best solution in the market, that is the best protection on IP you could possibly have. And
Well,
so,
if you're scalable and global, I mean, you win,
yeah,
right? And so there could be a new incumbent going to challenge you, but it's going to take a lot to undo that.
yeah.
And
So,
that's why you have to continuously innovate. You can't rest on your laurels.
so if you were giving advice to a young entrepreneur, and they looked at that matrix that we drew earlier, and they went, "Yeah, I want to be global and scalable," um, but they're starting out with something. Are there, 3 to 5 principles, tips, thought bubbles you kind of share them and go, based on my experience, you want to be global and scalable? Let's call that being bold. Um, Here's some things I'd suggest you think about as you go down the journey. Now, that question's
Well,
without
first
notice,
I
I
try
know.
to figure out what's this niche market that you can, that's important, that's a problem, a niche problem that you could solve, that if you did successfully, there are adjacent bigger markets that it could be big and global, but you're going to take a little piece of it. That's how we
Uh,
did with saying, if we can't, this poor island that's been decimated by a hurricane in the Caribbean, if we can't help them, we don't deserve to be in business. If we can, that's hope that we have a potential business, but you can start. And the advantage of a niche small problem like that is that you can do it for a small amount of money. You don't need to have tons of money to start. You can start with a very simple solution and a low capital amount, and maybe even get that customer or partners who want to help with that customer to help you fund it. So that's the best because you have a small amount of capital at risk. You have a very defined problem you're trying to solve that you know, if you're successful, would scale to something bigger. So I think that's really a way to think about opportunities, not just, oh, I have this idea of something I want to make. No, what's this big unsolved problem that you can skinny down into a very niche one that's easy to address without tons of time, people, and money? Because if you can prove that, then you have a basis to say, hey, this is kind of worth pursuing.
mm. And
There's
you
a
made
lot
it,
of people that go get a ton of money and all this, and they fall flat on the face because they're solving a problem that nobody cares about.
yes, and you made a really interesting, you used a very interesting word in that, which goes to the heart of the idea of business being a force for good on the planet, right? A lot of people go, I've got this amazing idea. It's going to be the next big thing. I'll go on capital raise. I'm going to launch this. And usually, or not usually, but often people will, um, frame the biggest problem because that seems to have the biggest financial payoff attached to it later on, right? The comment you made, which I thought was fascinating, was if we can't solve this small problem really, really well, we don't deserve to be in business. And
Absolutely
I
not. Then you should
that
shut it down and do something else.
but that idea of if we can't solve this, we don't deserve to be in business. At the heart of business being a force for good is that you start a business that deserves to be a business because it solves a real problem. And then I love the idea of, but look for problems that have bigger adjacent markets if you get that solution. So transferable solution. Anybody, actually not just a young entrepreneur or founder, but anybody in business should be thinking about that. I mean, the same would apply to an established company thinking of entering a new product into the market or new markets. If we can't solve, a meaningful, important problem, we probably don't deserve to enter that market. We don't deserve to sell the product, if you like. And being deserving of being able to sell your product is a very challenging conversation for some people to think about. Do you deserve to get sales? Is a challenging question, right?
Right. I mean, is it contributing to the greater good?
Yeah,
And is it making people's lives better?
yeah,
I mean, Steve Jobs in the beginning, I'm sure he thought that the iPhone made everybody's lives better, and probably did, but we have some people suffering from too much iPhone use
yes,
and kids who actually have mental health issues from it. But in general, it was a massive improvement over prior technologies and makes it possible for people who were unbanked and no phone systems, and they could be in emerging markets around the world, Africa and various island nations, and suddenly they can do business from their phone and they don't even have a bank account, but they're able to have digital accounts and buy and sell and do business. It's remarkable. So the force for good there is great, but it does have some negatives as well, of course,
Well,
and
but
overuse.
I think if we unpack that, the iPhone itself is a revolutionary device, and as you say, it brings capability and capacity to people everywhere that they otherwise didn't have. Some of the negative consequences that you're talking about were actually other companies launching products because the distribution platform existed.
Right.
The iPhone didn't launch the products that maybe are
No.
causing mental health challenges or addiction to
Addiction,
a screen.
overuse. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Other products that were launched. I've got this idea, it'll go viral, but does it contribute to the greater good? I want to dive into um, a slightly bigger conversation. Then I'll come back and wrap up with kind of three quick questions for people to know a bit more about you. Just quick question, quick response, and we'll wrap it up. But because you're in the front end of innovation, you might end up entering markets or going into geographical markets where there's politics attached to it. And I don't mean government politics, although that could be the case, but the politics of an industry, for example. There's a certain amount of politics involved in people not wanting you to replace fossil fuel generators, because there's a big industry on that,
Oh,
so
well, there's entrenched incumbent, right? They don't want
yeah.
to give it up.
So do you even try and tackle that, or do you just stay away from that, build your product and prove it in use? Do you find yourself having to somehow tackle the politics around what you're trying to change, or do you just let the
We
product
try to
speak for
avoid
itself?
that. We just try to show the benefits and utility of what we're doing without criticizing overtly what people are doing today because people are attached to it. And
Mm.
so when you try to criticize what people are doing successfully, that's not exactly winning. And I would broaden that to the political divides that we have, particularly in the US. I have many friends that have completely different political views. I mean, we're opposed, but these are good people. They're smart people, people I share many values and experiences with. And so I just try to hone in on what's the common good that we can agree on and work. And I'm not cutting anybody out of my life because of that, just on a personal basis. But that same principle guides me in business. I mean, it doesn't do any good to criticize your competition. You need to understand them and try to do better. But that political argument isn't probably productive.
No, and it's often recommended as a marketing strategy, become the protagonist or become the whistleblower of the industry, if you like, and um, you can focus on solving the problem and selling the product, or you can focus on making everybody else wrong. And
Yeah, so we come about it as all of the above. So, we're not saying get rid of your diesel generators. We're saying as you invest in new technology, add our self-generating power to your fleet. And your diesel generators could support us if necessary, if we needed more power, or we can augment them, or over time, maybe you don't need to replace them. But instead of saying throw it all out,
yeah,
just we're going to evolve and help you do it better and we can all coexist. And I think when that sort of philosophy is more successful when you're challenging a deeply entrenched incumbent. You just try to do it better, but you don't say, hey, this has to end.
yeah. Lauren, there's I could unpack your your career journey and the lessons you've learned from it for hours, really, for people, because you're in there doing it. You're in there launching new products that require a manufacturing system behind them, that need to be delivered to a location, that have complexity attached, but they solve really fundamental, real problems. There's a whole lot of principles that people can tap into just from today's episode. So I'm greatly appreciative of that. I'd love to wrap up with these three quick questions for us to
Okay.
kind of understand Lauren a little more. Um, was there any particular setback at any moment in time that really reshaped how you think about things?
Well, personally, I had three, well, two serious, but one almost near-death experiences. And um, that made me have, I'm here to do something, right? So
Yeah.
I'm here to make a difference in the world. And I had some physical disability from some of that that also led me to believe we are not our bodies, that it's our mind, spirit, and heart, which are the most enduring aspects. And these things have informed, these understandings at a young age have informed my entire life journey and my business journey.
Mm. And I've heard multiple people saying that the real lessons came from a near-death experience they had. I'm not suggesting that as a parenting technique for anybody, but
No, my parents were like horrified, but anyway, it's just one of those things that happen.
yes. So, and you're a problem solver. So, if you could solve one kind of mystery or unanswered question or problem that we have, and you were guaranteed you were going to solve it, you knew you were going to solve it, but just one that we're having in the world today, other than what you're already doing, is there anything that piques your interest? Might be the basis of the next thing you do. Anything big you want to solve?
Well, it sort of builds on that statement I made earlier that I think one of the biggest problems we have in the United States and increasingly globally is, intolerance of difference. I mean, it used to be a very basic part of the American character that we accept all different kinds of people and backgrounds and differences and political views. And today there's kind of like, oh, it's we, them, us against them, and really diametric views. And I think this is terrible. I think it's terrible for the human race. I think it's terrible for countries. I think it's terrible for global relations. So I'm really thinking about how we can learn to communicate in ways that are effective and accepting of each other's differences. Doesn't mean we tolerate bad behavior,
Mm,
but that we find a way to peacefully coexist with one another. I think it's one of the biggest challenges of our time. And if we could solve that, of course, that would lead to less conflicts and war and things like that.
yeah,
So to me, that's the biggest problem is a lack of acceptance and understanding of the other, however we define that. And, I try not to live that way, but I think probably whatever I do next will be something along those lines.
interesting. And lastly, if you could have sat inside as a fly on the wall of any one of the great negotiations anywhere in the world over time historically, where what would you have liked to sat in on to see what was really actually discussed?
Well, historically, it would probably be something around World War II, but right now, I think the really biggest problem that I would like to be actually a part of the negotiations, if I could, is really around the Ukraine, Russia, Russia invasion of Ukraine, because I believe they are the firewall to World War III, and I'm not sure that the best minds are all there, solving this problem. I think it's extremely complex, but if we could solve that, that would be a really interesting negotiation to be in and be very compelling to see what could you do to stop this terrible situation in Ukraine.
Lauren Flanagan, you do like to take on big problems, and
World
then
peace.
and yeah, and but try and solve them, right, and then go back to first principles as you try and solve that. I'm really grateful for the time that you've given us here. I know that you're on a business trip. You're not even in your own hometown at the moment, so you
I'm in a hotel, a nice
yeah
one,
taking
but a
take,
hotel.
taking some time on a business trip to record this episode with us. So I'm very, very grateful. I know there's a lot of wisdom there that people can lean into, particularly those people that want to take something to market that changes things, that shifts the dial completely. So thank you very, very much. I'm really grateful.
Well, thank you, Simon, for inviting me. It's been a really interesting and fun conversation, and I hope there's a few pearls in there for those looking.
I'm sure there are. Thanks, Lauren.